The Grand Council chamber floated in orbit around the gas giant Threxia, shimmering in translucent elegance, a monument to 1,000 civilizations and their collective arrogance. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy sat around the obsidian ring, their faces filled with amused contempt. At the center of the vast chamber, the hologram spun slowly. The Terran solar system, with thousands of bright red Zarkari war icons crawling toward the small blue sphere labeled Earth. High Chancellor Varnes, his crystalline eyes glittering with smug certainty, raised one slender hand. "Let us proceed to predictions." 2 hours, offered Lord Revok of the Hern Dominion, tentacles curling with anticipation. "You're generous," sneered Councillor Zeth. 1 hour. No more. Amid the laughter, Overlord Kraxis sat forward. His presence alone silenced the room. His massive form gleamed with iridescent armor, and his eyes, cold and sharp as obsidian knives, swept over the council with disdain. "I assure you," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "this species will not last beyond 40 minutes. Their fleets are outdated, their weapons primitive, their strategy laughable." Polite applause rippled around the chamber. But then, something unexpected. A chime sounded. The room's master display flickered. A Terran transmission. Live. The council exchanged puzzled glances. The humans dared to speak. The hologram shifted. A man appeared, uniform crisp, posture iron straight. His face was calm, eyes steady, and his voice carried the weight of finality. "This is Admiral Alexander Graves of the Terran Defense Command." Kraxis chuckled. "They send a single man to speak for their entire species." Graves continued, unfazed. "The Zarkari fleet is now within engagement range. As per Council observation protocols, this transmission is open and unfiltered." He paused. His gaze sharpened. "We request that you record the next 60 minutes for historical purposes." Silence. Then Graves leaned slightly forward. "We will begin." The screen cut to black. In that silence, Kraxis's grin widened. He turned to Varnes. "You see, they've accepted their fate." Varnes nodded, though something in his eyes flickered. Outer Sol System. Kraxis sat aboard his flagship Dominion Ascendant, its command deck stretching beneath a crystalline dome. His officers bustled with pre-battle rituals, but none questioned victory. "Status," Kraxis barked. "Zarkari fleet in full formation," responded First Strategist Vek. "All weapons charged. The humans have deployed 52 vessels, if they can be called that." Laughter rippled across the command deck. "Proceed," Kraxis ordered. On the far edge of the solar system, the Terran fleet floated in silence. Admiral Graves stood on the bridge of the TDS Unbroken Resolve, hands clasped behind his back. Before him, thousands of Zarkari ships advanced like an endless storm. "Command link established across fleet," reported his comms officer. Graves nodded. His voice was quiet but steady. "Protocol Black Sunday execute." At that command, Terran ships shifted. Armor plating folded back, revealing sleek, gleaming hulls that pulsed with impossible energy. No one outside Earth had ever seen these designs. No one had ever needed to. The Zarkari fleet began firing long-range plasma lances. The plasma bolts vanished against invisible barriers before reaching the Terran line. On the Dominion Ascendant, Vek frowned. Energy fields, beyond projected capabilities. Kraxis waved a dismissive hand. "Tricks. Continue bombardment." But the plasma strikes continued to disappear, swallowed by gravitational distortions that left no trace. Graves spoke softly into the fleet comm, "All units. Phase 1. Instantly, Terran ships vanished. On the Zarkari screens, chaos erupted. Terran vessels reappeared behind their formations, within their lines, inside their blind spots. And they opened fire. No conventional weapons. These were kinetic strikes accelerated to near-light speed. Entire Zarkari warships collapsed inward, twisted into molten wrecks before their crews understood they were targeted. "Impossible!" Kraxis roared. Graves' voice came through open frequencies. Phase 2. Zakari ships attempted to reposition, but their navigation systems scrambled. Guidance systems inverted. Engines ignited in the wrong directions. The Terrans had hijacked their very control systems, rewriting their software in seconds. "Shut them out," Vex screamed. "Purge all systems." But the infiltration was deeper than software. The Terrans' AI constructs had already embedded themselves in the core command architecture. No purge could reach them. "Consolidate formation," Craxus ordered, panic finally flickering behind his eyes. But there was no formation left. Graves' voice came again, cold and quiet. Phase 3. From nowhere, spherical constructs materialized around the Zakari fleet. Black as void, humming with unreadable energy signatures. They pulsed once, then released. The Zakari ships disintegrated, not exploded, not torn apart, but unmade at the molecular level. Silence followed where titanic armadas had once roared. On the Dominion Ascendant, alarms wailed. "Singularity weapons," whispered Vec. His scales paled. We thought those were theoretical." Craxus stared at the empty void where half his fleet had been. "Retreat," he whispered. But the command never reached his fleet. Graves' voice crackled through. "There is no retreat." On the Terran command bridge, Graves nodded once. Phase 4. A wave of energy swept the battlefield. An EMP burst on a scale beyond comprehension. Every remaining Zakari ship powered down. Their reactors darkened. Their weapons fell silent. Helpless. Defenseless. Graves spoke one last time, his tone like steel. "Protocol complete." In the council chamber, the silence was deafening. High Chancellor Varnes broke it. What just happened?" A junior aide's voice trembled as he read the report. "The Zakari fleet has been eliminated. Total engagement duration 49 minutes, 38 seconds. The council members stared, frozen. And then Graves' voice echoed in their chamber. "To the council," he said softly, "please update your predictions." The transmission ended. No one spoke. Aboard the Dominion Ascendant, the silence following the first wave of annihilation cracked like glass beneath weight. Craxus gripped the armrests of his throne. His claws, usually pristine, dug deep furrows into polished alloy. On every display, fleet status reports flickered, red overlays stacking faster than they could be read. "Report," he demanded, though he already knew the answer. First Strategist Vec's voice faltered for the first time in 3 centuries. 72% of our vanguard has been lost. No confirmed kills on the human side." Craxus clenched his jaw. "The main force will engage. They cannot withstand numbers." He wanted to believe it. But beneath the practiced arrogance, fear stirred. On the TDS Unbroken Resolve, Admiral Graves stood unmoving, gaze fixed on the growing chaos. "Enemy attempting to re-establish formation," Commander Rourke reported. "They're pulling heavy cruisers into shielding positions." "Let them," Graves said quietly. The Terran fleet moved with silent purpose. Each vessel shifted as if part of a single organism, executing pre-planned maneuvers without hesitation. Every ship knew its place, every second calculated months in advance. Craxus' main formation, 6,000 ships strong, surged forward. Plasma batteries lit up space, streaking toward the Terran line. This time, Graves did not shield. He allowed the energy blasts to streak forward. At the last second, the Terran fleet simply vanished. The Zakari bolts flew harmlessly into emptiness. "Impossible," Vec hissed. "We had trajectory locks." A moment later, human ships reappeared, not in front, but behind the main formation. Before the Zakari could turn, the Terrans fired again. This time, they unleashed dark matter ordnance, tiny spheres traveling faster than sensors could register. Each impact compressed ships into singularities, leaving nothing behind. No debris, no wreckage, just silence. On the Dominion Ascendant, alarms screamed. Craxus slammed a fist onto his command console. Countermeasures. Scramble. Scatter formation. His voice broke slightly on the last word. In orbit around Threxia, the Grand Council watched the live feed in horrified silence. Counselor Zeth's voice was faint. This cannot be accurate. The technicians' hands trembled. Direct feeds from Council observation satellites. No interference. High Chancellor Varnes leaned forward slowly. We were wrong. The room, moments before filled with arrogance, now felt suffocating. Back in Sol space, the second Zarkari wave charged. Thousands of interceptors raced ahead of heavy cruisers, swarming toward the Terran fleet. Graves gave a slight nod. Deploy Valkyries. From the bellies of Terran carriers, sleek, silver ships launched in silence. The Valkyries. No crew. Fully autonomous. They moved like thoughts given form, each microsecond recalculating strategy. They met the Zarkari interceptors head-on. In seconds, the battlefield transformed into a massacre. The Valkyries didn't merely fire. They sliced, weaved, and disassembled enemy ships at subatomic levels. One Zarkari pilot managed a final transmission before his ship blinked out of existence. They're not ships. They're predators. On the Dominion Ascendant, panic took hold. Craxus rose from his throne. His voice cracked. Form perimeter. Retreat the second wave. Regroup behind battleship line. Too late, Vec rasped. They've breached all lines. Craxus slammed both fists into the console, shattering it. I will not lose to these vermin. Graves' voice came over the open channel again, calm and surgical. Overlord Craxus, your position is compromised. Surrender is still an option. The entire Zarkari command deck fell silent. Craxus' eyes blazed. Never. Graves didn't respond. He didn't need to. Commander Rourke, Graves said quietly, prepare the Singularity drones. A ripple of tension passed through the Terran command deck. The drones were humanity's final warning, a weapon of last resort. Are you certain, sir? Rourke asked softly. Graves nodded once. Deploy. In perfect silence, black spheres emerged from Terran carriers. They shimmered, pulsed, and then vanished from visual range, slipping between dimensions. Craxus saw nothing. Only his fleet sensors screamed warnings. One by one, Zarkari ships began to collapse without visible impact. Not explosions. Erasures. Whole vessels blinked out of reality, erased at the quantum level. Vec's voice broke. Overlord, we must run. Craxus spun on him, eyes burning with hatred. I do not run. Vec whispered, then we all die. In the council chamber, chaos reigned. They're using technology we cannot even comprehend, one delegate shouted. Varnes held up both hands. Enough. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed horror. They hid this. For centuries. While we dismissed them. The thought hung in the air, too heavy to voice aloud. What else have they hidden? Craxus finally broke. All forces, disengage. Retreat. Fall back to Dominion space. But the retreat order never reached his fleet. Every communication channel had been severed. Then Graves' voice returned, softer than before, yet heavier than gravity. You were given a choice. The final wave hit. The Singularity drones detonated in perfect synchrony. The entire Zarkari formation collapsed. Thousands of ships gone in seconds. The Dominion Ascendant shuddered violently. Consoles exploded. Officers were thrown from their stations. Craxus fell to one knee, staring out the shattered viewport as the heart of his fleet disintegrated before his eyes. On the unbroken resolve, Graves exhaled quietly. Phase 3 complete. Minimal human losses. Commander Rourke whispered, Sir, what happens when the galaxy realizes we've been hiding all this? Graves' expression didn't change. They won't realize, he said. They'll understand. The final Zakari flagship vanished from sensors. Graves closed his eyes for one brief moment. End transmission to the Council. He opened them again. Prepare for Phase 4. The Grand Council chamber no longer hummed with confidence or laughter. The air was heavy, suffocating. Massive view screens continued broadcasting the disaster unfolding in the Sol system. What had been expected to last minutes, a brief spectacle of Terran defeat, had become a clinical execution of the galaxy's most feared military power. High Chancellor Varnes sat motionless. He had lived through a dozen conflicts, but none unraveled like this. The final tally came in. The Zakari fleet, 60,000 strong, was gone. Every ship, every fighter, reduced to vapor or erased without trace. Councillor Zeth finally found his voice. It cracked. They made fools of us. No, Varnes murmured. We made fools of ourselves. The room shifted from shock to fear. They'll turn on us next, whispered a delegate from the Xani worlds. Varnes spoke coldly. They do not need to. We've seen enough to know we were never in control. Then, another chime. Another transmission. Every head turned. Admiral Alexander Graves appeared once more. Calm, composed, polite. His eyes locked onto theirs through the projection as if he could see each one of them personally. To the Grand Council, he began, his tone almost conversational. We hope the demonstration has been educational. No arrogance. Just certainty. Varnes straightened. What is it you want, Admiral Graves? Graves smiled faintly. Not warm. Not cold. Calculated. Nothing we do not already possess. A murmur ran through the chamber. Graves continued. For centuries, we allowed this council to observe humanity. You believed we were harmless, primitive. That was intentional. We've observed your empire's rise and fall, your wars, your councils, your treaties. He leaned forward slightly. And we waited. Craxus' visage flickered on a secondary screen, haggard and bloodied aboard his collapsing flagship. The Overlord's eyes were wild. You tricked us. Deception. Cowardice. Graves turned his head just enough to acknowledge the raging warlord. His expression didn't change. Intelligence, he corrected softly. The Zakari flagship finally broke apart in silence. Graves refocused on the council. You judged us based on what we showed you. You never considered what we chose not to show. A heavy pause. Graves' tone cooled. The war is over. It ended before it began. Varnes asked the only question left. Why reveal yourselves now? Graves' expression hardened. Because you crossed a line. He paused. His next words dropped like stone. You threatened our children. A hush spread across the chamber. Varnes swallowed. We did not authorize the Zakari to strike civilian worlds. Graves tilted his head. And yet, they did. The silence spoke volumes. We will not seek retribution, Graves said. You will do that yourselves. Quietly. In shadows. You will erase those responsible for authorizing that atrocity. You will make an example of them. He allowed the weight of his words to settle. Because if you do not, he continued, voice soft but sharp as a blade, we will. The screens cut to black. No one moved. Finally, Councillor Zeth rasped, if they can do this to the Zakari, they can do it to any of us. Varnes stood slowly, the old weight of arrogance replaced by sober clarity. We are not facing conquerors. Then what are they? Someone whispered. Varnes exhaled. Guardians. The chamber fell into chaos. Shouts of panic, fear, demands for retaliation. But Varnes raised one hand. Enough. The room fell silent. We retaliate, and we die, Varnes said coldly. They are not predators. They are patient, calculating, dangerous only when provoked. He turned toward the central dais. We must send a response. Councillor Talvra hissed, what response can we possibly offer? Varnes closed his eyes for a moment, composing himself. We acknowledge the demonstration. A tremble in the air. And we apologize. Stunned silence followed. One delegate sputtered, "Apologize? To them." Varney's voice became iron. To them. Or to the dust of our worlds. The point needed no further discussion. Sol System. Hours later. On the unbroken Resolve, the bridge was quiet. The enemy was gone. The council silenced. But Graves knew the real battle had just begun. Commander Rourke spoke quietly. "Sir, what happens now?" Graves turned toward him. "Now," he said, "we watch." He clasped his hands behind his back. "They'll purge their warlords. Rewrite their policies. All to avoid provoking us again." Rourke hesitated. "And if they don't?" Graves' answer was simple. "We warned them." The comms officer looked up. "Sir, incoming transmission. From the council." "Put it through." Varney's appeared on the screen. His face was drawn, exhausted, but composed. "Admiral Graves, on behalf of the Grand Council, we acknowledge the demonstration. We regret the actions taken by one of our members." He bowed his head. "And we humbly request no further escalation." Graves inclined his head in return. "There will be none, provided you police your own." Varney's nodded. "We will." The line closed. Graves exhaled. Rourke broke the silence. "They were never ready for this." Graves' eyes hardened. "They were never meant to be." He turned from the view screen and spoke softly. "Helm, bring us about. Set course for home." The fleet pivoted as one, silent shadows slipping back into the darkness from which they came. Mission complete. But the galaxy would never sleep as peacefully again. The unbroken Resolve cut through the void, heading for Earth. The war was over before it had truly begun, but Graves knew the aftermath would ripple far longer than any battle ever could. He stood alone at the observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the endless dark. He heard the soft approach of Commander Rourke. No footsteps, just presence. "Permission to speak freely, Admiral?" Graves nodded without turning. "They'll fear us now." "They always should have," Graves replied. His voice was steady, but not without weight. Rourke hesitated. Was it the right call? Revealing this much? Graves finally looked at him. "We didn't reveal half of what we could have." Rourke blinked, understanding settling in. Then what they saw was just a lesson, Graves finished. A glimpse. Enough to make them think very carefully before stepping too close again. He turned back to the stars. But never everything. Never all of it. Rourke fell silent. Council chambers. 48 hours later. Varney stood before the assembly. His voice was calm, but his words held iron. The Zarkari threat has been neutralized. They overstepped, and the consequences were immediate. We will not repeat their mistake. Some counselors still bristled. Others had gone pale. All understood the subtext. Challenge humanity, and entire empires could vanish in minutes. They hid their strength, Varney's continued. For centuries. They allowed us to believe in our superiority. He let that sit. Such patience, such restraint, is not the mark of savages. It is the mark of masters. The chamber was silent. Varney's straightened. Let this be our last miscalculation. The vote passed unanimously. Humanity was not to be antagonized, challenged, or provoked. Trade could continue, observation permitted. But military action? Unthinkable. On Earth, the aftermath was quieter. The public never knew the full scale of what had transpired. Reports simply stated that the Zarkari fleet attempted aggression and was repelled. No details. No footage. In the shadows, those details were meticulously archived, studied, locked behind layers of clearance. Not because Earth feared weakness, but because knowledge, too freely given, became temptation. In a high-security facility beneath Geneva, Director Elena Mercer met Graves in a sterile, windowless room. She slid a data pad across the table. The Council has folded. The Zarkari are leaderless. Power vacuums forming in 3 sectors. Graves nodded. Expected. Do we intervene? Graves shook his head. No. Let them tear each other apart. We'll watch. We'll learn. Mercer hesitated. And when they come to us? When they beg for alliance? Graves leaned forward slightly. We negotiate. But we never kneel. She exhaled slowly. You played a dangerous game, Admiral. Graves met her gaze. It was never a game. Far from Earth, aboard what remained of a Zarkari escort ship limping through contested space, Craxus sat in silence. His armor was scorched, the crown of command shattered. He replayed the final moments over and over in his mind. Ships vanishing without fire or debris, entire fleets collapsing into silence. He had never feared death before. But now, he understood something far worse. Irrelevance. He was not defeated. He was dismissed. In the shadows of the ruined bridge, a soft voice spoke. They let you live. Craxus turned. His second-in-command, Vec, stood with a datapad. Why? Vec asked, though he already knew. To tell the story, Craxus rasped. His voice was raw, strained from screaming into the void. Vec nodded slowly. They made you a witness. Craxus looked out the shattered viewport. Stars glittered. Indifferent. They made me a warning. Lunar Command Base. Graves arrived in silence. The debrief with Earth Command was brief but thorough. He entered the final report into the secure archive. At the end, he typed one final sentence. Potential future threats. None visible. Potential future mistakes. Ours to avoid. He sat back, closing his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, Rourke was there again, hesitant. There's something else, Rourke said quietly. Graves arched a brow. The AI overseeing Valkyrie operations compiled a prediction model. And Rourke hesitated. It predicts that the Council will fracture. That eventually, isolated factions might attempt to replicate what they saw. Build weapons. Study forbidden sciences. Graves sighed softly. Curiosity is inevitable. Rourke spoke even softer. One scenario predicts that, in 200 years, one of those factions will be reckless enough to try. Graves nodded. And we'll still be watching. He stood. We don't stop being vigilant because we won once. We stop being vigilant, and we lose everything. Rourke exhaled. What if they become like us? Graves looked out across the lunar horizon. Earth shone, serene, fragile, and defiant all at once. Then, he said quietly, we'll decide whether to teach them or bury them. In the Council's deepest archives, forbidden knowledge was already being hoarded. Blueprints half deciphered from Terran weapon signatures. Fragmented telemetry. Clues to things that should never be touched. And yet, one phrase echoed through every private council meeting. What if we could harness it too? Seeds of ambition, carefully buried, now trembled toward the surface. Back on Earth, Graves stepped into the cool evening air of his private residence. No uniform. No insignia. Just a man beneath the stars. Beside him, his daughter ran across the lawn, laughing, oblivious to the machinations of galaxies. He knelt down as she rushed into his arms. Did you win, Daddy? She asked softly. Graves smiled. Not proud. Not boastful. We kept you safe. That was all that mattered. Above them, the night sky glittered with 1,000 distant lights. Most would never dare threaten Earth again. The few who would learn the same lesson, one way or another. Humans didn't conquer. They waited. And then, when necessary, they ended things.